Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Ramona, for sharing that. Ramona's story I found really interesting because Ramona came from the Caribbean to this country and already had a strong identity of idea of her identity, who she was as an individual, which wasn't prefaced by her ethnicity. It was about her family, her socialization. My upbringing, I am a child of the Windrush generation. So my parents came to England, to London, in the early 50s. And I was born here. And I have to say that throughout my life, I've always been aware of my ethnicity. But having said that, my identity has been formed by the values of my family and my peers and those around me. But I recognize and have lived the fact that my experience as a Black child, as a Black man, is different to those who are white. So my experience as a Black man, as a middle-aged Black man, is different to a middle-aged white man. Now there will be commonality, but let me give you an example. Just before the lockdown, I'd finished work for the day and I probably had a suit on, I didn't have a tie, but I decided that I needed a sports top. And so I went to Lillywhites in the middle of London. And I entered the store and I was looking around, browsing the tracksuit tops and other clothing. And whilst trying to decide, which color suits me, etc., I felt a presence. And, I continued. And then I was aware that as I moved, there was somebody following me. And so I moved to a point that I could see who it was that was following me in the store. And it was as I suspected, it was a security guard. And even though I was a middle-aged Black man, had a suit on, I was still being followed in the store. And there was a backdrop. There's a psyche that says, well, this Black man that's here, he might not necessarily be honest. That's the kind of narrative to what was going on. So I decided, let's take this a little bit further. So I moved from one rail to the next, and the security guard was following me. And so I decided I'm behind the security guard. So I moved around and he couldn't see me anymore. And I could see him looking for me. Where's this guy gone? And then I came up behind him and tapped him on his shoulder. And he looked at me and then he smiled because he saw how ridiculous it was to be following me around. And we had a conversation. I had a conversation with him about why he decided to follow me. And to be fair to him, he was open to the conversation. He was open to the conversation, and I challenged him. I said, would you have followed, a white middle-aged man around the store dressed in a suit similar to me, and we had a conversation. Whether it changed his mindset or not, at that moment, he reflected. He reflected. Now, throughout most of my adult life, I have challenged inequality and race. I've been the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion advisor to the Methodist Church for about 2.5 years. But most of my working career has been spent within the Metropolitan Police. And Ramona gave some examples of the experiences of many from the Black community of the criminal justice system. And I don't have to rehearse with anyone here that the experience of Black and ethnic minority people within the UK in terms of the criminal justice system is different to that of white citizens. whether that's stop and search, whether that's in terms of sentencing for similar offences. The sentence given to Black and ethnic minority offenders will be longer, less likely to receive bail, etc. And there are stats, there are decades of statistics that demonstrate that difference. But it doesn't just stop there, it goes on in terms of education, that there are educational differences in terms of young people, particularly from Black communities, that their representation at university, that they will not be, proportionately, will not be as represented as their white counterparts. If we look at health, and we've seen the tragic outcomes of COVID-19, there are huge multiple health inequalities that exist today. Black women are more likely to die in childbirth or to lose their first child. We have to ask ourselves, why is that? For me, I believe that I've been blessed and that my own particular ministry, and I call it a ministry, in terms of challenging these inequalities, wherever I have been. So whilst in the Metropolitan Police, I was one of the founders of the National Black Police Association that challenged racism and institutional racism within the Metropolitan Police and nationally across the country. The death of Stephen Lawrence in 1993 shook the country, but it was the efforts of Doreen and Neville who changed legislation in this country in their journey to bring justice for Stephen. As a result of that, I and two other colleagues gave evidence at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and helped to shape the language of institutional racism. We said that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist. Now, that was unheard of at the time, that those who are personnel of an organization would then turn around and criticize the organization in such a public way. But we came from the Black community. We saw the disproportionality that existed, whether in stop and search or arrests or charging or sentencing. It was obvious to us. The way in which personnel, Black personnel, were treated within the organization, again, was a different experience. And so we believed that we had an obligation to stand up and to challenge, because you know, the police service of this country, it's the one organization that can take, well, one of the few organizations that can take away your liberty. So we created the Black Police Association to challenge a number of these disproportionate issues, working alongside communities to bring about greater accountability, because at the end of the day, the police service is accountable to you and I. It's our tax pound that pays for that institution. And we know today that although things have improved, there's still huge disproportionality. When I left the police service, I became a Labour councillor. I became a Labour councillor in 2014 in North Kensington. And during that period of time was the tragic fire in Grenfell Tower. Now, I wasn't the councillor, that wasn't in my ward, but that tragic fire where 72 people lost their lives, for me, was avoidable. It was avoidable. In North Kensington, men have a shorter life expectancy than men in the South. They have a 15-year difference. So if you live in North Kensington, and this is mainly Black and ethnic minority communities, the men will have a 15-year shorter life expectancy. Women will have a 12-year difference in their life expectancy. And again, I was privileged to be able to try and address some of those issues whilst I was there. The issue of proportionality and the journey leading up to the death of 72 people goes back several decades. It goes back, for me, to the Windrush generation. That in the 50s, in the late 40s and the 50s, North Kensington was one of the largest African Caribbean communities in Britain. And it was devastated as the result of a road being built right through the community. And that road has some relevance to Church House, because it's the Euston Road, which then turns into the Westway flyover. And that was built right through that black community. So right through North Westminster, through North Kensington, and through North Hammersmith and Fulham. And those were black and ethnic minority communities. Now, I have to explain to you that that road is not straight. If they had built the A40 and the Euston Road straight, it would have gone through some of the most wealthiest communities in this country. It would have gone through Chelsea, Knightsbridge, etc. So again, for me, it highlights this whole thing about inequality and ethnicity, and also socioeconomic conditions. But with that is the story of whose voice do we actually listen to? So when I was a local politician in Kensington, whose voices were being listened to? I have to say that the voices of North Kensington were not as amplified as the voices in the south of the borough, South Kensington, Knightsbridge, etc. And that is the history of that entire area. And so when we come to talk about stories, the importance of stories, it's essential because it provides an alternative narrative. It gives a different perspective. And I have been in a very privileged position to be able to give an alternative perspective, whether through my work within the Black Police Association and giving evidence at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, or giving evidence to government inquiries, or indeed the work that I was doing with Boris Johnson when he was mayor of London. And I was one of his advisors in terms of crime and young people. I've been in that position where I've helped to try to change the mindset and to provide an alternative narrative. And I think that for me, that's one of the importance of telling the story and hearing the alternative narrative. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.